Being a keyboard warrior does not make you safe from the law.
The situation in the United Kingdom has somehow gotten more dystopian, and that's saying something. We're going to break all of it down today and so much more in this episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where I take on the craziest ideas from across the internet and across our politics, all from a center-right, independent perspective. If you're new here, please do consider subscribing and sticking around, and regardless, do hit that like button and comment with your thoughts as we go along. I do read the comments and I pick a few to respond to in every episode. Now, last week we did talk about the dystopian and censorious response by the United Kingdom government to the riots that broke out after false rumors spread after a horrific crime that the perpetrator of that crime was an illegal migrant. Authorities had already begun arresting people, and not just those involved in looting or vandalism or other things who should be arrested, but even people who just posted things online on social media. Well, since we talked about the story, things have gotten even more insane, with authorities now targeting people outside of the UK for punishment for their speech crimes. Joining me to break it all down is my friend and fellow YouTuber, Sydney Watson. So Sydney, you and I might need to be a little bit worried because apparently the UK is not just arresting people for their social media posts that are actually, British and live in the UK, but they're looking at extraditing people who post illegal things in Britain abroad and actually potentially giving them the full force of the law. Take a listen to this clip from the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, on Sky News.
We will throw the full force of the law at people. And whether you're in this country committing crimes on the streets or committing crimes from further afield online, we will come after you.
Talk to me about that, because we have seen some high-profile figures whipping up the hatred. You talked about it in there with the officers, in fact, about this being added to by online commentary. I mean, I'm even thinking of the likes of Elon Musk getting involved. What are you considering when it comes to dealing with people who are whipping up this kind of behaviour from behind a keyboard, maybe in a different country?
Being a keyboard warrior does not make you safe from the law. You can be guilty of offences of incitement, of stirring up racial hatred. There are numerous terrorist offences regarding the sort of publishing of material. All of those offences are in play if people are provoking hatred and violence on the streets, and we will come after those individuals just as we will physically confront on the streets the thugs and the yobs who are causing the problems for communities.
Sydney, this gets overused a lot, but this is actually Orwellian.
Oh yeah. Oh my God, yeah. The thing that made me laugh the first time I watched that was, I don't think that the police officers in the UK even understand that America has a constitution that protects a bunch of rights that aren't protected in the UK. And I'm pretty sure, as far as the extradition treaty that even exists, even if this was possible, Brad, on some level, the extradition treaty that exists between the UK and the United States requires that a felony be committed. The thing that has happened in the UK is a felony in the United States, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And I was going to point that out as well. You can't extradite somebody for something that's not a crime in the country they did it in, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
We have a First Amendment. We are allowed to spread misinformation or foment racial hatred or whatever. I don't know. This guy he foments some hatred in me. And when I watch this clip, I want to scream and pull my hair out. So maybe he's the one that should be arrested.
It's just insane because this is similarly to how cops in Australia behave, which is honestly really sad. And I think that, I'm only coming at this from a Commonwealth vantage point because I am a dirty, dirty Commonwealthian. But it's really interesting because a lot of people come at US cops for all sorts of reasons, some of which I think are pretty valid. But you guys, I think, to a large extent, don't realize that your cops are actually having to follow so many laws that actually genuinely protect you. That doesn't exist in Australia. It doesn't exist in the UK. And it's so interesting how we are legitimately at a point where things that would have been actually considered a meme a couple of years ago, the cops arresting people for a Facebook post, is legitimately happening. That is so mad. That's so mad to me. That's so crazy.
Yeah, and I feel like you can hear it in this clip, the way he's speaking in the same sentence about people that are rioting, that are burning down buildings and looting stores, and people that are posting things that hurt people's fifis on the internet. It's a dangerous conflation. I mean, have we lost this preschool lesson of sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me? Are we literally that out of touch in the West now?
Yeah, I would say so. I think definitely, and again, I think it's predominantly in these Commonwealth countries, Australia, Canada, the United Kingdom. I think what you're seeing is basically police forces, also legislators going off the edge of the cliff because they're so much more concerned about protecting special interest groups than actually upholding the wants and needs of their citizens, actually protecting their citizens from foreign invaders or even domestic invaders, like people who are doing bad things in their own countries. And it is weird because I don't know if you've noticed, I'm certain that you have because you're like me, you live on Twitter. There's been all of these tweets and all these comments and things about the two-tiered policing and the two-tiered justice system, but it actually exists. And I think that we've seen that play out pretty significantly, at least over the last number of weeks, even over the last number of days. I've seen a bunch of people try to draw comparisons between, say, look at this, murderer over here who committed all these heinous crimes. He happens to be white in the UK. He did all these things. And, he went to prison and there was no riots about that. But, you guys are all kicking off about all the immigrants and the illegal immigration that's flooding the country and how the country is having its foundation fundamentally changed. Oh, look at you bad white supremacists. But they're failing to realize the white guy got held to account. The white guy went to prison. He was actually served justice for the crimes that he committed. Whereas I don't think that I'm not saying in all cases, but certainly there are cases where police will turn a blind eye. I think we saw that a lot with the grooming gangs, not just in Rotherham, but just around the UK generally. People will basically be forced into positions where they have to sort of pick between themselves or actually, will the police do their job in this particular situation? So I think it's really interesting how people don't even grasp what's going on. The police don't grasp how their own actions are contributing significantly to the unrest in the country because they won't police specific interest groups.
But they will police Facebook posts. I mean, some of the posts that we're talking about are ones encouraging violence, but even by US standards, that would still be protected free speech because it's not actually the narrow definition of incitement. But some of them are just like incorrect statements. So, for example, people originally thought that the individual who carried out the mass stabbing that kicked off all these riots was an illegal migrant, and that's turned out not to be true. The person was born in the UK. So people posted that incorrectly and shared that information and are getting arrested for it. That's crazy because part of, being able to speak and think is the freedom to sometimes get things wrong. And locking people up for misinformation or sharing falsehoods requires a government department of truth deciding what's true and what's false and enforcing accordingly. I mean, can people really in the UK not universally see how literally dystopian that is?
I think that your average population likely can. Because I think that people are looking at this and going, okay, many of the things that maybe they supported that, again, I think there's a massive, massive difference between the way that Americans conceptualize laws and enforcement of laws and the way that people in the UK, Australia, so on, conceptualize the same issue. So even if you have people that are in the UK that ordinarily would be like, well, this law is okay because it protects my interests or, it enforces the security of our country, they're probably seeing these things play out and this type of legislation be enforced like this. And they're going, what? Why am I being literally jailed for, 3 months because I put on Facebook, if you don't love it, leave it.
Right.
I think that even for your average layman, your average person, even with no comprehensive understanding of the legal system or policing or anything, you would have to look at that and go, that is madness.
So I also want to get your thoughts on this because the Labour government in the UK is also going after tech giants, including US companies. So reporting here from The Telegraph says that tech giants will be forced to ban fake news under Labour plans, and firms could be required to suppress posts even if they are not illegal. So this reporter explains that tech companies will be forced to ban fake news from their platforms under plans being considered by the government in the wake of the riots. Sir Keir Starmer suggested on Friday the government would review social media laws as part of efforts to prevent future disorder. The Telegraph understands that these ministers are looking at introducing a duty on social media companies to restrict, quote, legal but harmful content. So it could mean that firms are required to remove or suppress posts spreading fake news about asylum seekers or other topics such as self-harm, even if they do not meet the threshold for illegality. So now they're talking about doing this, where the government will decide what news is true and fake, and what news is allowed to be shared and posted and what news isn't, and what speech is legal but harmful and shouldn't be amplified. So they're not even going to be able to express themselves openly online at all if this goes forward.
I mean, look, we've been trending towards this for a really long time. I know I keep coming back to Australia, but it's the closest frame of reference that I have. Australia already has things like this in place. And so it's not surprising to me at all that the UK would be trending in the same direction. Typically what happens is the UK passes some dumb piece of insane legislation and then Australia is hot on its heels. So I think the fact that you have the government trying to legitimately control what information is out there, what information is being disseminated, again, I don't find that remotely surprising in this day and age. What I do find really interesting is that you always have these knee-jerk reactions to any given situation that's unfolding that results in civil unrest. And rather than anticipating people's sadness and disagreements and whatever, because realistically, right, like we don't actually get a say in what happens to our countries. We feel like we do because we vote. But realistically, like the amount of immigrants that are coming into the UK and even Australia and the illegal immigration and things, it doesn't really take place in Australia because we have a natural wall, the ocean, so that's pretty good. But a lot of these things that transpire, your average citizen doesn't actually get a legitimate, like down the line say in what is happening to their own countries. And I think that's really sad. And so when these governments can't anticipate the anger that these people will be experiencing, they knee-jerk instead when it ultimately unfolds, and they go, well, let's pass this insane piece of legislation, this emergency piece of legislation that will exist for all time, and we'll just, have this grip on the people. And I mean, I know I sound like a crazy person right now, but I'm so black-pilled on this. It just makes me so cross because I think to myself, all of this could have been avoided had you actually anticipated the needs of your citizens.
Well, and it's interesting because in the 2020 riots, media and government officials were very quick to say, well, we need to understand the root causes. And I personally am never okay with rioting or looting or anything, regardless of the causes. But in the same way that we had to have an honest conversation about police brutality, right? And we had to talk about the George Floyd killing and other things. And there were productive discussions to be had there that were derailed by people, murdering each other and burning down buildings and looting. In the same way, I don't condone the actions of anybody who's rioting. I condemn them. But you should think about the reason that this is happening. And by suppressing harmful or angry or misleading information online, you're not actually changing the fact that people are feeling angry, feeling racially hostile or whatever. It's like you're just putting a Band-Aid on a bullet hole and you're not solving any problem. In fact, you're probably going to make that wound explode and fester by trying to suppress it.
I think the saddest part, and you make such a valid and good point, because really what they're doing is they're going to be forcing people's feelings underground. And then what do you get when you suppress people, when they're not allowed to have a say, when they're not allowed to actually express grievances with not only their government, but policing, all sorts of things. You push these people underground. And really what you do is then you fester even worse radicalism. So I think that we have a tendency to do this all over the place. That there's that phrase that sunshine is the best disinfectant. That's legitimately true. Even if I agree with some of the sentiments of the British population presently, I don't think that forcing them underground is the way to go. I think that if you actually shine a light on the issue, allow people to have their say, that actually would do a lot when it comes to cooling down some of the racial hostility that is, or not even racial, maybe let's say ethnic hostility that is coming to light. I think that would go a really long way. But instead, once again, governments get it wrong and they think, what we should be doing is we should be suppressing our population, and not even just the population, the native population. Acting like they're radicals and extremists and crazy people because they have legitimate grievances with the way that the country is presently being run.
Yeah. I do wonder if you think Americans take for granted the First Amendment, because it's not perfect. Some bad stuff still happens here, some censorship, but more often than not, we are protected by our legal framework or in the court system in the long run. But I genuinely think that stuff like what's happening right now in the UK would happen within a decade in the US if the First Amendment was no longer in the books. I genuinely believe that.
I think you guys are uniquely situated because your forefathers had the foresight to put things in place that meant that you wouldn't, by and large, experience the same level of, I guess, tyrannical dystopian nonsense that many of our countries, the Commonwealth countries, are currently experiencing. Obviously, like you said, it's not perfect, and there are some misinterpretations. There are areas, I think, where there's a little bit of weakness and whatnot. But yeah, I would agree with you that were it not for your constitution as it presently stands, I think a lot of this would have already happened to you. And I actually think it would be worse because America, so much as it is a melting pot, has a lot of issues that are constantly being brought up, but where you're protected is in the fact that you can actually discuss them. Yeah, no, I think you guys are really uniquely situated on the world stage because you are actually protected. And it's kind of funny, actually. I just had some friends visiting from Australia, went shooting and did a bunch of stuff and sort of traveled around Texas.
Of course, you had to take them shooting.
Yeah, we did. No, I was like, let's go fire guns at things. That sounds like fun. But they were really taken aback by how few regulations exist, but in a good way, where they were like, oh, we can just walk onto the shooting range. Like, we don't have to do, obviously, I had to give my driver's license and do whatever, but they were like, they just trust you. I'm like, yeah, I feel like there's parts of the United States that are a high trust society because it's not nanny stated like everywhere else. And I think that America is actually wonderful for that. So good job.
Well, I love people like you because you can appreciate America, unlike so many people who grew up here who hate it and take it totally for granted. It is maddening. But Sydney, thank you so much for joining me. Everybody needs to check out your YouTube channel and your website, The Publico, which I'll link to both. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Brad. Thanks for having me.
Up next, we've got to talk about an absolutely insane moment featuring a mainstream media reporter and the White House press secretary, where the reporter, of all people, tried to call for the censorship of Donald Trump and Elon Musk. Trump and Musk just did a big interview on X, formerly known as Twitter. There were a bunch of technical snafus, but more importantly, in the build-up to this interview, a Washington Post reporter asked the White House what they were going to do to stop it in the name of misinformation. Take a listen.
Elon Musk is slated to interview Donald Trump tonight on X. I don't know if the president is going to tune in. Feel free to say if he is or not. But I think that misinformation on Twitter is not just a campaign issue. It's a America issue. What role does the White House or the president have in sort of stopping that, or stopping the spread of that, or sort of intervening in that? Some of that was about campaign misinformation, but it's a wider thing, right?
Yeah, no, and you've heard us talk about this many times from here about the responsibilities that social media platforms have when it comes to misinformation, disinformation. Don't have anything to read out from here about specific ways that we're working on it, but we believe that they have the responsibility. These are private companies, so we're also mindful of that too. But look, it is. I think it is incredibly important to call that out as you're doing. I just don't have any specifics on what we have been doing internally as it relates to the interviews. Not something that I'm tracking, and I'm sure the president's not tracking it either.
So this is absolute madness. The press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, didn't really say a whole lot in response there. So it's more the question here that I want to go into. You have a reporter from the Washington Post asking the White House, the highest levels of the federal government, what are they going to do to stop or interfere with a conversation between Donald Trump and Elon Musk taking place online? Excuse me, what the f***? Is this not America? Do we not have a First Amendment and free speech where people are allowed to say whatever they want and have conversations publicly and say things that some people consider to be misinformation or incorrect? Who elected this dude, speech czar at the Ministry of Truth? And it is so crazy to me that a reporter, of all people, wouldn't understand why giving the government the power to police truth and shut down misinformation is so inherently problematic and ripe for abuse. After all, the Washington Post just a few years back published something called the Afghanistan Papers, where they extensively documented the many lies and deceptions told by U.S. officials about the state of America's war in Afghanistan, where U.S. officials were misleading the public and trying to cover things up to make it look like the war was going better than it actually was. Well, the Washington Post was contradicting the government and making a bunch of claims, most of which have borne out to be true, in the eyes of government officials at that time could have easily been labeled as misinformation and shut down. In a free and democratic society, you need to debate what the truth is, not trust any centralized entity to determine one truth and enforce it as some kind of mandate. And the fact that a journalist of all people, because you could almost forgive the ignorance of just an everyday person who doesn't know better, who maybe thinks something like this, but a journalist, a trained professional journalist at one of America's biggest newspapers, to have such a fundamental misunderstanding or lack of appreciation of our basic freedom of speech and our basic press freedoms is truly astounding and reprehensible. And you have to ask, why are people who clearly hate Donald Trump, right? I'm sure he's a left-wing reporter. It's pretty obvious from his question, and it is the Washington Post. Why are they so afraid of the fact that people might actually just hear Trump speak? Shouldn't you just be able to disagree with his message or point out why he's wrong or fact check him or otherwise engage in debate? The fact that you feel the need to actually try to censor and stop and deplatform him from speaking reflects poorly on your own ability to actually engage or disagree or disprove the things that he's saying. And it's crazy that the same people who constantly scream about democracy, I mean, the Washington Post's slogan is literally "democracy dies in darkness," are now advocating for darkness and for censorship rather than open discussion and dialogue, which is the lifeblood of actual democracy. The unfortunate thing, though, is that while this is an alarming soundbite, it's not really a surprising one. It's sadly indicative of the new wave of progressive woke journalists who've taken over mainstream media. And increasingly, there are still some good journalists in the mainstream media. There's still some classical liberals who believe in free speech and freedom of the press and open debate and actually do remain committed to the true ideas of journalism, but they're increasingly outnumbered by these types, these woke ideologues who actually want to shut down and deplatform ideas. They're not interested, they're not curious, which was always at the heart of journalism, was a curiosity to understand what people believe and why they believe it. Well, now they want the bad people's beliefs to be ignored and shut down and pushed into darkness, and the good people's beliefs, in their view, to be amplified and uncritically platformed. Babe, that is not journalism. That is partisan propaganda. That is public relations. And more importantly, it is an absolute embarrassment to the field of journalism. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Are you even surprised at this point to see this kind of thing from mainstream media flacks? And now it's time for Brad versus TikTok, my daily segment where I take on the craziest ideas from the Clock app.
Pronoun of the day is slug slugs.
Make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet, and do remember to hit that like button as we go along to reward me from suffering through the absolute depths of stupidity that is TikTok. Today, we're going to take a look at a cringeworthy, just truly incredibly cringe, anti-capitalist TikToker that I recently discovered, starting by taking a listen to his song about why America is bad. Here's what he's captioned his new theme song for America.
Don't work together. You gotta figure your shit out on your own. Be the #1 money getter. Then live in a big mansion all alone. Oh, what could be better than living the American dream? When you reach GOAT status, who cares about the rest of the team? We praise the ones at the top with all the dough, but without stagehands there would be no show. So I wanna know, what's so wrong with lending a helping hand? There's inherent value in every human, but we're not meant to do all by ourselves. That's a lie to keep us divided. Instead, we should all take and give help. That's how we really get united.
Wow. Babe, don't quit your day job. My hope is that he was trying to sing bad, because if he actually thought he did a big one with this, then yikes. Now look, that's no shade to those of us who are not musically inclined. I can't carry a tune to save my life, but you do have to know your strengths and weaknesses, and that's why you will never catch me singing on the internet. Although there is somewhere out there a video of me singing Beyonce karaoke, and it's Truly, truly horrific, and I hope it never sees the light of day on the interwebs. More importantly, though, this guy's whole account is about why capitalism is bad and against America's individualism and our whole kind of concept of making money and being successful as a positive thing. But I'm not sure he really understands the economic value system that he's critiquing, because there's nothing inconsistent about a capitalist system with people still choosing to help each other. Voluntary, private action, mutual aid, to assist people in your community, to donate to charity, to volunteer, all of those things are fully compatible with and actually integral to a free market-based economy. The dispute is not over whether we should care about each other. It's about whether our economy should be organized through private sector activity or through big government and bloated bureaucracy. So nobody's stopping you from helping other people. You should be. And in fact, we give tax deductions and other things to encourage charitable giving. And many of the billionaires and ultra successful businessmen that this guy rants about on his page have actually done an amazing amount to help poor people and help the suffering, both in America and across the world. Moreover, this guy seems to blame capitalism for the fact that people are self-interested or have an individual emphasis over a collective. But this is getting the relationship backwards. It's actually just part of human nature to be self-interested, though your self-interest encapsulates the interests of the people that you care about, like your family. It is not in line with human nature to care about complete strangers as much as you care about your child or yourself. Now, what capitalism with reasonable boundaries and restraints does is that it harnesses people's self-interest and ties it to serving the community. In order to get rich, you've got to create a product or offer a service or do something or make a smart investment or in some way offer something positive to a large number of people or create opportunities like jobs for other people. Whereas through government redistribution or socialism, you can get rich by just convincing the government to give you someone else's money. And the incentives to build a great successful business are non-existent, if that's even allowed. I also don't agree with this notion that American capitalism encourages people to go it alone and not work together. If anything, it's the opposite. Capitalism encourages people to engage in voluntary transactions with people all the time and to do mutually beneficial exchanges. I'm buying stuff off Amazon from small business owners across the country who I've never met. They're creating a product that I value and I'm giving them money that's worth it to them for their time. I'm going to the local coffee shop down the street from me way too many times per week, to be honest, and they're enriching my life with delicious coffee and an awesome atmosphere to go with my partner, and I'm helping them make money to pay their bills and pay their employees. That is working together in another way. This analysis just really lacks sophistication and, of course, lacks musical talent. Here's some more of what passes for economic analysis on this guy's page. Take a look at this video entitled "Why Capitalism Sucks," where he's pretending to do a skit flashing back and forth between a business owner and a prospective employee.
I want you to do this thing for me.
No, I don't want to do that.
I'll pay you money.
Oh, I don't care about money. I'm an artist.
Ha! I'm going to increase the cost of everything. You need those things to live. How are you going to pay for them?
Okay, I'll take some of that money.
Oh, well, I won't keep giving you that money if you don't do it all the time for me. And I'm only going to give you a little bit of money. Yes, I mean all the time. Like 40 to 60 plus hours a week.
Oh, okay. What do you want me to do, I guess?
So this was so wild to me. Because what is his assertion? That if you want to be an artist, you should just have all your needs met by other people? Everyone else should just work to provide your food, your room and board, your life, so you can paint and doodle all day? Like, yeah, babe, sorry, you're an adult. You have to work and earn resources to take care of yourself. Nobody else has an obligation to take care of you. And of course, this is totally economically unrealistic and inaccurate. It's not like there's only one employer in the world. There's many different options, and that's why your wages aren't going to be as small as possible, because you can improve your skills and get new job offers and move on up in the world. And what's ironic about this as well is that the reason many things in the cost of living is so incredibly expensive is not because of free market capitalism. Free market capitalism has increased economic growth and made things in many areas much less expensive and much more accessible. The areas where the cost of living is the most out of control are things like healthcare and education, which are overwhelmingly regulated and controlled by the government and funded extensively with taxpayer money and subsidies that distort the markets in all sorts of unproductive and inefficient ways. When you look at markets for things like electronics or appliances that are mostly free, well, they've become much less expensive and much more accessible over time. I also think it's funny because you literally can be an artist and provide for yourself under capitalism. You would just have to create art that people actually want and actually like. See this all the time. I'm not saying it's easy to make a go as an artist, but you see this all the time. People through Etsy or through Amazon who build whole businesses designing products and artistic or interesting decorations or paintings or other things that people genuinely love. And then, of course, there's lots of private institutions like nonprofits or universities that are funded privately or through government grants that all allow people to be artists still, even in a capitalist world. But what you don't have in a capitalist world is the ability to just sit on your ass all day and do whatever art you feel like doing and have all your needs met by society. But rather than a shortcoming of capitalism or our existing system, that is actually a positive thing. That is how it should be, my friend. And if your singing is anything to go by, maybe capitalism isn't the reason you're unable to be an artist professionally. You guys let me know what you thought of that wacky anti-capitalist content. And do remember to hit that like button to reward my suffering, because I must have just lost a ton of brain cells watching that absolute brain rot. All right, guys, that is it for this episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet. Do remember to hit that like button before you go, and do comment with your thoughts down below. I do read the comments, and I pick a few to respond to in every episode. And with that, we'll talk again tomorrow.